Okay, so here's the question we're dealing with. Find and quote some description in which Smith shows the difference between the other colonists and himself, right? So here we are. We found a place in the reading where there's a new president who is little beloved and of weak judgment. And then he gives things to Captain Smith, who by his own example, good words and fair promises, set some to mow and others to bind. So here, you could use some of this quote here, and what it would do is it would prove that Smith is showing himself as a guy that gets things done, and the other guy as somebody who is not very, smart. All right. So if you could grab something from this, you'd show how Smith's showing himself as, someone who gets things done, and everybody else is kind of dumb. Now, why would he do that? Isn't he trying to make himself out to look like he is the reason that the new settlement is working? He is the, smartest, best leader ever. So see if you can write an answer in there for that one. Do you have a question about it?
No.
Okay, so see what you can do about getting an answer in there, and I will pause the reading, the recording, I mean. There it goes. Okay, so the next question is, what in John Smith's description of the Indians, native inhabitants, can you find that reveal what he thought, liked, and disliked about the natives? All right, and I went over to the article and I highlighted a bunch of things. All right, he gets captured by the natives. Let's see if I can find it. The Native Americans. It's down here. Okay, and here he calls them savages. All right, and it shows where they uh, came along the river and killed uh, these people, and they shot them full of arrows and killed them. And then it shows where they captured John Smith, and they killed everybody who was with him, but then they brought him to the fire and they warmed him up. So there's this contradicting thing about violence. And then he shows them his compass, which is one of those magnetized needles, and they all stood amazed with admiration. And then they brought him to eat, where he was, after their manner, kindly feasted and well used. So we have these conflicting ideas of them being very violent and, in his mind, savage and uneducated, and yet kind at the same time. They warm him up and they give him plenty to eat. And let's see. And then they became friends. It says that they were friends, and they let him eat. But Almighty God, by his divine providence, had mollified the hearts of those stern barbarians with compassion. So he thinks somehow that God has intervened, and even though they are barbarians, he sees them as, having feelings and compassion. Um, and then he blows off this cannon, and the poor savages ran away half dead with fear. So your job is to find something in John Smith's descriptions of the native inhabitants that you find reveal what he thought, liked, and disliked about the natives. We covered a number of things. He thought they were violent. He thought they were barbarians, but at the same time, they were interested in his compass, and they fed him, and they, got him warm. So apparently, he did think that they had some compassion, even though at the same time he was thinking they were barbarians. So try to answer that one. And I will turn off the recording. unpause this, and we'll go over the answer to this one. What are the violent episodes that Smith relates, say, about his attitude towards violence and the other colonists' attitudes at the time? He seems to accept the violence is just part of living. The violence of the natives, the violence of his own people. He even had some violence towards some of his people, taking them prisoners and sending them back to England. So apparently it's just part of what you do to deal with life. And how might this early American experience have influenced the attitude towards violence in modern American movies and novels? We certainly have a lot of violence in American movies and novels. Apparently, it is accepted as either entertaining or possibly an appropriate response to a situation. Maybe violence is shown in the movies as one way of dealing with things. So I'm going to turn off my recording, and you let me know when you're done with that question.
I'm done.
Okay, I'm going to go straight into the next one then. The next one says, what is Eurocentricity? What evidence of Eurocentricity can you find in John Smith's writing? Okay, let's first talk about what Eurocentricity is. Notice the way it has the word Europe, Euro, built into it, and centricity, center. All right, so it is the thinking that Europe is the center of the universe, and the way that if you were European, the way you think is the right way to think, because if you're European, you're at the center of the universe. So Eurocentricity is this belief that the European traditions are correct and right and in the middle, and the whole universe revolves around Europeans. And what evidence of Eurocentricity can you find in his writing? He's always talking about the European way of thinking and his own way of thinking as being correct, and as the natives' way of thinking and the natives' way of acting as being barbaric. And so how is Eurocentricity similar to attitudes of other cultures? Okay. What you have noticed if you've done some reading or studying of other cultures is that it is very common for a culture to believe in its own traditions and its own way of thinking, in fact, to the exclusion of other ways of thinking. So that if you're from one particular part of the world, you would think your way is the right way and everybody else's way is the wrong way. And this is true in all cultures, but the Eurocentricity seems to be more dominant or more predominant because of the expansion of England and the colonization of a lot of countries. So does Eurocentricity still exist today? Do we have these ancient European or Anglo-Saxon ideas that still seem to be central and still seem to be in people's minds as the correct way of doing things? So answer that whichever way you want to, thinking about medieval ideas, Anglo-Saxon ideas, concepts of Anglo-Saxon racism.
Have a nice day.
Thank you, you too. Where in the text can you find explanations that there may be misinterpretations due to a lack of understanding of culture? Okay, what is culture and why might it be misunderstood? Culture is a accepted way of believing, an accepted way of thinking within a group of people. And they establish their own culture by living and passing it down from generation to generation. Oftentimes it's based on a people's history. Geography will have a lot to do with it, whether it's warm or cold, or whether it's icy or watery, or whether they're hills, will change the way that people think and behave. All right, and if you come from one culture and come into another culture, the common mistake would be to believe that one's own culture is correct and the new culture, the different culture, is weird and wrong. And so in the text, we see explanations where uh, John Smith doesn't know why the natives are acting the way they are acting, and he uses his own way of thinking, his European way of thinking, uh, to try to explain them, and just assumes that they're barbarians and they're violent and they're not trustworthy, where in reality they are behaving within their own culture exactly the way that they have trained. Let me know when you're done with that question. Based on our study of English literature before the English settled in America, what direction did you expect American literature to take? What would be the natural progression from Beowulf to medieval to American writers? Well, it would make sense on some level that the Anglo-Saxon ideas that were present in Beowulf, the ideas of being a hero, the idea of establishing fame, the idea of being loyal to your people, and regarding honor and strength above all else. You would expect that to still remain to some extent. And then by medieval times, there wasn't quite as much need to survive every day, and they had more art and more other ideas. They started thinking about chivalry. They started thinking about truth and the proper way of acting. And of course, they had feudalism, so they had lords and underlords. So you went from the simple honor of Beowulf to this more idea of civilization and culture. And by the time you got to America, um, what would you expect? On some level, I would expect them to be able to, establish an even higher um, society that was more based on art and manners and chivalry. Um, but it is not necessarily what happened. So answer that question based on your study of English literature and tell me when you're done. Okay. Next question would be, in what ways did the structure of Southern society mirror the English traditions of feudalism, nobility, and chivalry? Uh, and you remember the Southern society had larger farms because of the geography and because of the fact that the Southern society was set up by men like John Smith, who were looking to set up a colony for England to make money for England. Um, so they did establish these large plantations where then they could then turn around and be the feudal lord. They could be the noble, the person who owns the land could think of themselves as better than everybody else. And they could establish manners and ways of treating each other that seem very noble and chivalrous. All right. And that is what happened in the South. The landowners felt as if they were the lords of their plantations, and they could treat the serfs whatever way they wanted to, or the slaves whatever way they wanted to, because they were, somehow better than their slaves. Um, and so the ideas of being a lord and being in a higher level of society continued. In fact, they still continue, and you still have things like ball dances and very fancy ways of dressing. And down south, you'll see a lot of smoking jackets and leather boots and large flowing dresses, because it is the concept of feudalism, nobility, and chivalry that is still existing. So try to answer that one and let me know when you are set.
Oh, I'm done.
Okay, so this one you're going to try to figure out something from the text on your own. You're going to figure out something on the text explaining whether you think John Smith's writings met or didn't meet your expectations of the evolution of literature. Maybe you thought that literature in America would be more sophisticated than literature in England. Maybe you thought that they would continue to develop chivalry and courtesy and manners. Maybe you thought that coming to America, they would have to abandon the old English ideas because they're coming to a new land and it's more violent, and they would have to focus on survival. But you're looking for anything from the text that meets or does not meet your expectations. So, do you know whether or not you thought that literature in America would be more sophisticated or more simple and more violent? Give me a guess.
Probably like more violent.
Okay. More what?
Violent.
More violent because of the way America is. All right. So what you're going to do is you're going to go into John Smith's writing and find evidence of violence. All right. Do you want me to help you do that?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to go into John Smith's writing here, and I'm scrolling and it's not moving. Okay, there it goes. I don't know what's going on. Okay, here it is. Okay, so we want to try to find some violence. Why do all my highlights disappear?
I see your highlights.
Oh. Ah, there it is. Okay. All right. So never mind. I'm going to go back and find something that seems more violent than it really should have been, and I'm going to highlight it in yellow. Okay. See if I can find it. How about this one where he talks about the way that they're living and the amount of work that they're doing and how hard it is. I highlighted it in yellow in case you wanted this. It talks about the way they're living and how hot it was and how miserable they were. So they have abandoned any ideas of, gentility or chivalry. I'll see if I can find another one. Oh, here's one where they talk about coming at John Smith, preparing to take his life for this mistake. So that shows the hard life And the way that he's writing is all filled with violence. So that's an option. Let's go back over to
Alright.
questions. So I highlighted some in yellow that maybe you could use. And then the last question, in what ways did the structure of Northern society break from the English traditions? How might this have caused the Puritans' problem back in England? Okay, Northern society wasn't worrying about, nobility and serfs and land ownership. They were trying to reestablish a simple religion. So, what problem might that have caused back in England? England would have been interested in the feudal ideas, like you're supposed to serve your lord, and then your lord is supposed to serve his lord, who's then supposed to turn around and serve the king. And the Puritans weren't interested in who the king was because their king was God, and they were not really interested in what England wanted. And as you know, eventually these ideas finally led to the Declaration of Independence, where the people that settled in America broke with the idea that they owed any allegiance to a king back in England. And that should solve the problem for you right there. Everything should be answered.